Yeah, I'm wearing a wife beater. Give me a break. It's like the middle of summer in Spain without AC. Also, what a terrible name. Wife beater? Ugh. Yeah, and we also can't use the school's cameras anymore. So your boy bought his own camera. Look, I can do this. If it'll do it. Maybe. Yeah. Does that make me a real YouTuber now? It is crazy that I went like 1,000 subscribers without actually owning a camera though. Yeah, so anyways, that's the reason there's only one video this week. Got banned from the cameras. All right, well, you guys already know. We put out a poll the other week. Wanted to know what you guys wanted to hear about. Compression won, but a large portion of you wanted to hear about EQ, and we'll eventually get through all of them. But let's do EQ. For this video, Carolina Alabau, who you guys probably already know, came and did a vocal for the video. So let's go ahead and check out that take now.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras que hacen cortes en mi alma, luego coses y entrelazas, todos mis miedos ahora hablan, convertidos en gigantes.
All right, well, here's my little spiel before we go into the computer. EQ is everything. Basically, all EQ is a volume meter specifically targeting, specific frequencies on the threshold of human hearing, around 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. I want you to think of it like that. I know a graphic EQ looks kind of crazy at times. You can also get like analog emulation plugins. But really, all we're doing is boosting volume in specific targeted locations. And using these specific targeted locations, we're going to find the parts of the sonic range that we want to enhance. And we also need to find the parts of the sonic range that we think, maybe aren't fitting for the song. Maybe they're interfering with another instrument in the mix. And also maybe they have some resonances that we don't want to hear. They're ugly. Maybe we're hearing a specific tone of the room that honestly we just want out of the mix. EQ is pretty simple, right? It's not too complex. It's just sculpting the sound in its purest form. Now, before we get into it, there are three kinds of EQ that we're going to go over today. First, we have a graphic or parametric EQ, which is by far the most common EQ. We also have analog emulations, meaning they're just basically going to act like old hardware units used to before graphic and parametric EQs kind of took over the scene. People like to use these to get that analog feel sometimes. I use them specifically with pretty much like guitars or anything that might have been recorded 30 years ago. And then we also have maybe my favorite one, a dynamic EQ, which kind of acts a little bit like a compressor using threshold and things. But basically what a dynamic EQ does is targets a specific range of the EQ, and then depending on the volume level that is being stressed in that specific location, it's going to reduce or emphasize basically after a certain threshold. We'll get into it later. It's a lot like a compressor. So if you've seen the video about compression, you're going to understand this a little bit better. First thing we're going to talk about today is that each range of a graphic EQ has a very specific tonal quality to them. And the more you familiarize yourself with them, the better you're going to be at controlling EQ. When you understand what 6K sounds like on a sine wave or any generic, tone, you're going to understand what 6K sounds like on a more complicated vocal. And by the way, 6K sounds like a box. It sounds like a cardboard box that you live in. It sounds terrible. I don't like it. I mean, depending on the tone you're getting, but I guess it's kind of ridiculous to say I don't like a specific range of human hearing. Yeah, but a buildup of any one frequency in any EQ is going to be rather distracting, and it's important to figure out where that is in your mix and maybe if we want to tone it down or tone it up. All right, so we're back in the DAW, and I'm going to illustrate my point about how I think if you can learn to characterize the EQ into certain sections and familiarize yourself with those specific sounds, then you're going to have a way easier time learning how to use an EQ to mix. In order to illustrate this, we're just going to take a clip of the vocal that we just heard, and then we're just going to kind of drag around a solo isolated section of the EQ so we can hear, kind of like with a magnifying glass, what that specific section sounds like. I've basically just made a peak that's like 6 dBs long, and I've taken the Q, which is basically what changes the thickness of this peak, and made it pretty thin. That way we are only hearing a really thin slice of the actual sonic range.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena
This is soloed.
mi pensar. Envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras. Siento
And now I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to make it a little bit wider so you get a bigger picture of what these ranges sound like.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras. Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras.
Cool. Also, I should mention a really cool tool that helped me learn a kind of the sonic characteristics of each range of human hearing is SoundGym. It's a subscription-based thing. I had to do it for my program here. But if you learn SoundGym, they have a really awesome set of exercises that are really going to help you dial in your ears on how best to hear these ranges. But back to what we were doing, I want you to notice something. Whenever the EQ curve is really thin and we go down to these lower ranges,
Siento profunda soledad,
dude, there's nothing here.
me hace verte.
Here, I'll solo the vocal so it's a little bit easier to tell.
Siento profunda.
Are you going to want any of that in your mix? Tell me genuinely. In what way is that going to be useful to you? It's probably not. But if we go up here, we're seeing this spike, right?
Me hace verte y recordar.
Now, one thing to notice, in her vocal, you will see, and I'm just going to drag this over here so I can talk over it. See all these spikes that are happening in series? Those are the fundamental frequencies of her voice.
Tus palabras. Siento profunda soledad.
So Carolina's fundamental frequencies, whenever she's singing, at least in this range, don't really start until like the 200 range. So the smart idea, and the thing you're going to hear in basically every mixing tutorial that is absolutely true, is whenever we're using a vocal, and especially a vocal as high as Carolina's voice, we don't need any of this. So let's go ahead and take this low cut, which if you're learning Infinity EQ, I just did it by selecting this little knob here. And we're just going to cut it out. I mean, no one's going to need to hear that. It offers nothing to the vocal range, and especially on a singer with such a high voice. Now, one thing you will see a lot of people do, and it's true to an extent, but I would, control yourself on this temptation, is they like to make these little bell curves here, thin it out, boost it like crazy. And it just scaled the image, sorry about that. And then they go searching for frequencies that sound ugly.
Siento profunda soledad.
Found one.
Envenena mi
Found one.
pensar. Me hace verte y recordar.
Found one.
Tus palabras. Siento
Found one.
profunda.
Now here's the problem with this. What you're doing is you're finding those harmonic frequencies that are in series, the fundamental harmonics of her voice, and you're boosting the crap out of it until it sounds terrible. And that is being confused as a distracting resonance. You're taking a fundamental nature of the vocalist's voice and you're killing it because you've emphasized it to the point where it sounds ugly. I've got news for you. Everything's gonna sound ugly if you boost it 18 dB and solo it. What I would encourage you to do beyond this is to listen to it without boosting and use your smart ears that you've trained to understand the different frequencies and then decide what sounds ugly. Basically, without soloing anything, what can you hear in the mix that sounds maybe boxy, a little too resonant, a little bit too harsh? All throughout this video, I've been telling you to memorize and understand the characteristics of what 6K sounds like, of what 200 sounds like, of what 10K sounds like, what those signature sounds feel like whenever you're listening to it in an entire mix, not just soloed.
Tu profunda soledad envenena mi.
Maybe this wasn't the best vocal for this. I don't really think there's anything in this mix that sounds particularly bad to the point that I want to cut it out because I find it to be an ugly resonant frequency. But for posterity's sake, let's say we do find something. I'm just gonna be as, nitpicky as possible and find something I think sounds even a little bit distracting.
Siento profunda profunda soledad envenena mi pensar, me hace verte.
The only thing I heard was right here.
Siento profunda soledad envenena mi pensar, me hace ver.
That mya, that sounds, you know, maybe a little bit heady, and I don't necessarily want that. And we can control that with dynamic EQ too, but we're going to do this for now. Let's just dip it down 3 dB.
Siento profunda soledad envenena mi pensar, me hace verte.
That sounds less so to me. Now, I'm not really going to add that much to this. Caroline is a really good singer, and there isn't that many issues in her voice. But I tend to break down how I use EQ into 2 different EQs. I use one that's clinical, meaning I find the resonant frequencies that I don't particularly enjoy, and I try and, you know, bring them down in the mix. I cut out the low mud that we don't necessarily need, and we try and basically clean up everything that feels messy. But then I'll go into another EQ and start emphasizing the voice in ways that I think are, you know, nice to sound. Nice to sound. Now this is based off of the frequency curve of a preset I found. It's in the pop section of my Infinity EQ. Sounds pretty nice. I've done some modifications, and to be honest, this shelf here and the really high range, like the 20K, is probably a little extreme. I don't necessarily need that much air, but we can modify it as we go. I think it adds a lot of nice presence to her voice, and I think because her voice is a little bit higher, I want to emphasize that even more, make her sit on top of the mix in kind of really sparkly way. And I say the same thing when it comes to microphones. If you guys have been in the comments, you ask me about what microphone you should get. I ask what the vocal range is that you're going to be working with, and I try and suit you with a microphone that fits that same vocal range. Now, this doesn't always work all the time. It's just a ballpark estimate, but you get the idea. So let's go ahead and hear the vocal with this and without this, and then I might make some slight modifications to it, you know, on the fly.
Siento profunda soledad envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras. Siento profunda soledad envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar tus palabras. Siento profunda.
Yeah, you see, it just makes her already bright voice sound nice and crispy and adds like a little bit of a smoothness to it that kind of brings out the air. And that's really this shelf happening that's kind of boosting around 6 dB over here. So that's a graphic EQ. Pretty simple, right? On the left side, the lowest notes the humans can hear. On the right side, the highest notes humans can hear. And then we just boost with volume what we want to hear and what we don't want to hear, keeping in mind if we can find the resonant frequencies that we don't necessarily prefer. But that does not mean killing the harmonic series of a vocalist. There's a difference between finding the resonant frequencies of an ugly room, maybe of an ugly vocalist, and also just destroying the vocal character of an individual vocalist. Do not confuse resonant frequencies with harmonic content of a vocalist. So really quick, let's go over the other kinds of EQ. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, bypass this EQ that I've already made. I'm going to turn on this. This is what I meant by analog emulation EQ. I want to focus particularly on this colorful one in the middle. We'll use that as an example. Now, we see these labels here, and you're going to find these labels, or at least these ranges of kilohertz and hertz on any of these different sort of analog strip-like EQs. But we have high frequency, high mid frequency, low mid frequency, and low frequency. It works the exact same way. It's just going to be knobs that boost or cut depending on what you want to do. You just don't get a graphic interface to show you. For example, in the settings I have right now, I've boosted the 14K 10 decibels. Let's hear what that sounds like.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena
Bringing out that breath
mi
again.
pensar, me hace verte.
Let's not boost that. Let's boost to 6K.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar.
Maybe 6K doesn't sound boxy, as boxy as I thought. What am I even talking about?
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar.
Let's boost the high mid frequencies too. This is the Q, meaning how narrow you want that peak. It's just like we were talking about in the beginning, how we've narrowed or widened the sonic range that we're going to be boosting.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar.
Yeah, so it's really high right now.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena.
Low mid frequencies, that's the boxy part. Yeah, like 2K.
Siento profunda soledad.
We found the box, guys. That's the box. Yeah, anyways, that's how that works. Let's go ahead and check out the last kind, which is a dynamic EQ. One of my favorites. Super helpful. Let's bypass the analog stuff. Let's bring back the infinity EQ that we were using before. This is TDR Nova. Free and amazing. The way this works is we select frequencies to be on. 3 is around, the 300K range. 4 is around the 1K range. We can move them to be wherever you want them to be. And then we're going to decide how much we want to reduce by. So let's go ahead and reduce the 5K range just for fun. Make it by that much.
Siento profunda soledad.
Now this is just acting like a regular EQ until we hit this threshold knob. We see this blue line start to show up, and this is where we decide at what volume we want to start pulling down that part of the EQ. For example,
Siento profunda soledad.
let's actually work with the 10K because I see a lot of harmonic content there.
Siento profunda soledad.
It's peaking around here on the knob, so let's pull that down. Now watch what happens. This is going to be an extreme example.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar.
You see how it's starting to pull down that harmonic content whenever it starts to cross a certain volume threshold, which is right here.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena.
This is an amazing tool for cleaning up a mix without being too invasive, because we can either put an EQ curve and basically pull down the harmonic content on like the 2K, the 10K range for the entire song, or we can tell a plugin like this, hey, when it gets too crazy, pull it down, but otherwise leave it alone. Amazing. And it works a lot like a compressor because of the threshold. Now it's going to be actively reacting to the music. A great way to add a lot of organic content and not sacrifice the content of your vocal just because you want to reduce a certain frequency in a specific area of a song. Yeah, so do you remember way at the beginning of this thing where we started saying, okay, I found a frequency in the 2K I don't really like. It's not too bad, but let's just, take it down by -3 dB. I could instead go on the TDR Nova, go to the 2K range, make the Q a little bit, a little bit thinner, and then maybe that threshold is a little bit extreme.
Siento profunda soledad, envenena mi pensar, me hace verte y recordar.
See, that mya is now being controlled by the TDR Nova. It's a lot cleaner. And hey, by the way, free. I use it on every mix. It's amazing. Except when it glitches and corrupts your whole file, which has happened before. So watch out with the TDR Nova. It's still good though. Also, I just want to mention that I was using an infinity EQ and a virtual mixing rack to show like the analog EQ and the graphic EQ. There is a really great company called Analog Obsession, which makes analog EQs, analog compressors, all these things that are really high quality, and it's free. So if you are worried about this and you're thinking, oh God, I gotta go get that analog mixer now, you can just get this one for free through Patreon. I'll link it in the description. TDR Nova, also free, highly recommend. And with that, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Follow me on Instagram at RealAudioHaze. If you want lessons, email me at realaudiohaze@gmail.com. And with that, I will see you in the next video.